and break your nose. They need to have their own space in the mix. Hence, back to the Moody Good analogy, just to use them as a loudest dude in EDM right now. If Skrillex was still pushing that, I would give Skrillex as an example, but Skrillex is not the loudest one anymore. He used to be. But yeah, so it's literally, how does it all sum together? If two frequencies exist in the same space, it will create beating. So beating, we heard what that sounds like. Here's what it literally sounds like again. Let's just open up our operator here. All right, so I'll push these both additively to the output so I can hear two sine waves. All right, so that's beating. So when two frequencies exist in the same space, they phase out with each other. They don't create wobble. It's not just a wobble effect. It's not creating wobble. It's wobbling because the start position of both of those sine waves are going in and out of phase with each other. Similar to the way a polyrhythm would work, if anybody knows what a polyrhythm is. Polyrhythms are rhythms that line up on top of other rhythms. So, say if you're doing a 7/8 rhythm on top of 4/4, it would take about 4 to 8 bars for the 7/8 rhythm to actually line up again with the original downbeat. So, that's what happens here. They diverge and they create beating. Higher frequencies create faster beating. But why it makes that movement is because it is phasing out and neutralizing the waveform, and literally descending down to zero. And that's important to know because EQ by creating phasing. A notch filter is a reverse polarity bandpass filter. So a notch filter is literally created out of effects of phasing. When you do like basic types of noise canceling with EQ, because you can do this straight up with the EQ, you can go and use two of the exact same source material and then phase out every frequency except like the mid-range or something like that, where the vocal exists. And we're not going to go through that today, but it's really cool that you can do that because it's literally manipulating audio fundamentals and not, cool plugin effects. It's not something that's native to a plugin. Again, like a comb filter in a delay. You can do this with anything. It's native to the tool itself, not the VST. All right, so you want to make sure that you understand these qualities, how they mess up your mix, internalize this. So you're going to see a very, very consistent quality here among most things, which is bottom around 60 to 80, thump, boomy, honk, fullness, boominess, vocals, a male, sibilance. All right, so sibilance, it's like that high, like hiss, anything above 7.5K and above. Can say 10K, but it is really above. So anything above 11K or 10K, not much energy or musicality. So again, why would you really need 14K? The 14K and above is not really necessary. If anything, if most of your mediums are going to be playing back, say it's SoundCloud 64-bit Opus, or even Spotify with 324, it's like you're still downsampling and you're still losing frequencies. Spotify less so than others because the quality is higher. Tidal 0, it's lossless. Same thing with Apple Music, both lossless. So those, you can go and make a for those mediums mix. Almost every mastering engineer I know has stopped offering masters for Spotify because most people have the loudness normalization off, and so it just doesn't make any sense anymore because it became such a thing that people realized that they can turn it off. Before, Spotify, I believe, didn't let you turn it off. Yeah, Stosu, that would be cool if you can post that, just about polyrhythms. I really love polyrhythms. That's one of the big limitations of electronic music for me personally, is that I can't go and write in a different time signature. I've written stuff in like 6/4, all types of shit, but it just doesn't work, you know? It's not droppable. It's not something I'd want to drop, you know, because I know it would just freak people out. I personally like my mixes to be very danceable, and like that's the point of the anti-negative project, you know, really. It's just to have an outlet so I can have vibes and have fun. Okay, so internalize this again. Internalize where this exists. Internalize these words: boominess, fullness. I guess you can use honk and squawk if you want. If you're working with a lot of like actual wind instruments. It's a little too much squawk around 2K. Can you subtract about 3 dB of squawk? All right, so that's something to keep in mind. All right, so now let's move on to the next thing. Rules of mixing. EQ. How to use an EQ. Some general tips about how to use a band. Okay, so I'm gonna open up ProQ in a second here, but I do want to talk about this first. Okay, so cut sharp and boost wide. That means that you want to cut sharp and boost wide. And Q shape will determine that. So what does that mean again? It means you want to cut sharp and boost wide. What does that look like? It looks like this. So cut sharp. So we cut sharp and we boost wide. So again, that's cut sharp, boost wide. Why do we do this? Because when you boost a harsh frequency or boost something, it's going to over resonate, self resonate, make it very much way more louder. Like if you push the EQ like this, it makes it very much more way louder. Because when you do it, the maths inside of it, they go and push it up and they go, hey, make this guy louder, but make it like super louder. Okay, so what does that mean outside of like idiot terms? All right, so like self-oscillating EQs are a thing. ProQ is designed like this. ProQ is one of the templates for EQ8. In my opinion, they are of the same maker. Whoever designed ProQ also helped design this. The key commands work almost identically. Option changes your Q. Shift should lock it in time, or it's shift option, okay. So shift option locks it, but option will change your Q. That's really the big thing. So you can't really like, in ProQ, you can change the type of band with clicks, but you can't do that here. So again, self-resonating bands. And to Stosu's point, like, it does create phasing issues because it's self-resonating. Because what does self-resonating mean? You're actually adding a new sine wave into the sound. So if you go and resonate very much more way louder at 30 hertz, you're literally adding a sine wave at 30 hertz because this band has an oscillator hooked up to it. And when you over resonate it, it brings volume to that oscillator. So I have a bunch of like, I have actually one really specific audio effects rack that I use for snares specifically. I think I have it in here. It's not the Grill Xer. So pretty much like you can use this EQ to resonate stuff again into your sine wave, and this is more of an effect. This is now going out of mixing and pretty much giving you like a pretty intense effect here. I can't remember exactly what I called it. Oh, here it is. Here it is, the perk pinger. The perk pinger. So I have this perk pinger and it goes and just hooks straight up to the scale here and allows me to ping perks. And that's what this is literally called in EQs. So again, ping. And so when you have a ping filter has a self-oscillating band. So it creates sine waves. when it over resonates. Sine waves. Alright, so if you put that shit in a sub, it's going to sound super loud, it's going to sound dope. Run that shit through a saturator, it's going to make a harder sub. So what I do is I go and over resonate, say like the body of the snare in order to get it to really pop. Just load this up really quick. I can kind of put into action. Alright, so you can hear the ring. Alright, so it's not super loud right now. But what I would do pretty much would be to over resonate this and then repitch the snare. And then maybe do the same technique using a high pass filter, over resonate the low cutoff point. So now I literally know where my EQ is affecting my waveform now. Yeah, so to Stosu's question, yes, at the body of the snare or to whatever sounds good. So I usually find the body because that kind of expands that. So if you wanted to make it sound like a little bit less ringy, and again, it's doing to anything that runs through it, kind of proving my point that it is a self-oscillating thing. So you're pinging and resonating this EQ, not just turning it up now. So if I widen this Q out, it gives it less ring, but it also kind of sharpens the body up. So notice as like I have this running through a saturator, and it also scales downward on the second EQ here because I don't want it to be too loud. I just want it to be present. So that's just an effects rack. I can actually throw that out to y'all and make sure you guys have that. Okay, so to the next point, if it doesn't need harmonics, shave them off. You know, so already what we talked about with beating, phasing, summing your global cup. So you want to make sure that everything fits together. If it doesn't need the frequencies, cut them off. You don't need to have them in there just for the sake of having them in there. If they can breathe, if they don't have anything that's clashing with them, you can definitely let them sit there. But you know, it's one of the main effects I really like about like trap and left field music is that like they don't subscribe to hi-fi. And hi-fi is just like overrated in a lot of ways. You know, where I love personally a bandpass vocal with some sine wave erosion on it. It just sounds sick. I just like it. It just sounds like somebody found a recording on some kind of 8-track player or whatever, or one of those hot clip things. I don't know if anybody remembers a hot clip. I think you have to be my age because they were like super short run, but they would come with like your Burger King kids meal and shit, and there would be like a little tiny tape that would like be able to play in these specific tape players, and they literally would sound like super bit reduced. Yeah, or Happy Meal toys in general. You know, just in general, like anything that has that kind of quality to it, bit reduction, that's kind of cool. So, you know, if the genre doesn't need it, so now that's getting into different EQ choices, not made off of physical mixing decisions, you know? So you're literally trying to, yeah, exactly. McDonald's totally had them. I think Burger King did. What I remember from Burger King is those gold plaque fucking Pokemon cards. That was the one. Anyways. Alright, so EQ before or after compression. So this is a very general thing. EQ before or after compression. Right? Yeah, those gold plates, dude. They gotta be worth something now. Not real gold, but that'd be hilarious. Alright, so this is a highly debated thing. So if you look on the internet about EQ before compression, you're going to find 50 engineers saying completely different things, each of them. Each of them saying, I do it before compression because this. I do it because that. It's like, so they'll literally do the same thing and have a different reason why. And so I've summed it up because I just like hate when engineers become elitist about shit in general. So it's just like, this is the most general way I understand it, because I don't like to choose one before the other in always sense. So I never always EQ before compression, vice versa. It's depending on what frequencies are affecting dynamics. So that's the most basic reason why you would use an EQ before or after a compressor. So if you had a ton of low end that was literally hitting your compressor, you would shave it off. Easy fix. You know, if somebody was like, always EQ after compression, then they're just like, oh dude, but my limitation, I can't, but, and it's like, don't want to be limited to that. So, you know, I think the logical way that most people use, and yes, why not both? To both. Yes, use both. Doesn't matter. Again, affecting dynamics. If the EQ is needed before the compressor to accurately compress a kick, so you need to EQ your kick before it hits the compressor, do it. But now since the kick is nice and compressed and you want to go and like boost up the highs or do some additive EQ after a subtractive EQ, then do that. Because like, again, what do you need to hear more of? What do you hear too much of? Simple. So it should always be based off your taste. But if you need guidelines, this is where to start. So this kind of covers like most synths, you know. So it's not like it's limited to just these. That's kind of the point of me bringing this up. All right, so we're going into depth about that right now, and we talked about all this stuff. So now some method. So we got two big methods: hunt and kill, and sweep and destroy. Again, both. And this is not for EQing. You don't settle after you hunt and kill. You don't just leave it there. Hunt and kill is made so you can go and hunt for the frequency and then kill it. So let's get a sample going on here. All right, so now we're going to get into Pro Q3. All right, so talked about, actually I kind of brushed over these two last things, but this is actually part of this. So hunting and killing. When you boost a band and sweep it through the spectrum to find the harshest frequency that's causing the most problems in the mix. Sweep and destroy. When you boost a band, when you reduce a band. So I said the same thing twice, but I meant reduce. So the exact opposite of hunt and kill, sweep and destroy. So you want to, you know, say like we're looking for something that's a problem in this. We want a specific thing from this mix. All right, so I hear a bunch of hi-hats and stuff and rides. Maybe I want to get rid of this. So you can do this at a sharper band. I tend to keep it around about 3, around here. So brings me to my next point, which is subtract or boost in increments of 3 dB. Because the human ear hears changes in audio in increments of 3, because our brains are computers and our ears have a certain algorithm that's digested by our brain pretty much, and so it's hard for us to hear those types of changes subtly. So if we reduce about 2 dB, it should be because it's just a little too much. It just needs a little So you just like, oh yeah, just like that. So like if I see anybody just like with 10 different little subtractions like this, it's like you are doing nothing besides adding phase problems. So like you want to be very like very specific about what you're doing with the EQ, because every time you add a band, you introduce beating and phasing along with, you know, frequencies that are already phasing with each other. Yeah, so yeah, don't do it at max because that'll hurt your ears. And like say if you are looking for something that's super harsh, I go and sweep and destroy. And this I'll do at broader Q. It's like, all right, you know, now that I've heard the way it sounds when I reduce the high end like this, where 5K and above is where, you know, the actual hi-hats should live. If we look at our chart, it should tell us that. So cymbals up to 20 hertz to 7.5. So literally almost the entire range. So that means a ride cymbal will have the harmonic content going all the way down to 200 hertz. So ride cymbals are very deep. They take up a lot of the frequency spectrum. Hence why they're used as like a small kit, like one of the main attractions in a small kit for a jazz band. Just because when you just ping it just a little bit, it just rides and just sizzles. Because it's so large, it just resonates for longer. So it's like I can hear that right here. Now I can start to reduce this band, you know, and also make it a high cut. This is the only thing I do not like about Pro Q, is that it calls high pass and low pass high cut and low cut. So it makes you think about it backwards. It just, everything's already backwards for me, so it's like it throws me off. So it's like I'll like triple guess myself and I'm like, no, I know it means that, but now low cut is low pass again. So it's a high pass though. High pass, high cut is a low pass. So something to keep in mind. You can change all your things like that. So I can like cut some of the main ping and the attack here and then just reduce all the things above that. All right, now I can hunt and kill for my low end. All right, so this actually I'm just going to turn into a low cut. All right, so now I know where most of the instruments are at pretty much, and I can kind of shape around it. So like if I want a little bit of the low end from that kind of bell tone, it's about 150 hertz, low mid range. So I want to keep some of that. If I wanted to go deeper into this and reduce the snare, that's a little bit harder now because the snare is existing at the same space as the main bell tone. So this is where you run into problems with like bootlegging and bigger samples where you can't really EQ around that meat anymore. You have to kind of like add to it. So like if I was going to go and do that, you know, I probably would keep this, you know, kind of bandpass like this, and then maybe add in a drum beat that kind of emulated some of it, but also took syncopation from that main sample. But if I wanted to eliminate the snare as a whole, I would go and find a little piece of this sample like this, right here at the end. This is one snare. So if I had RX, I can go and learn the noise profile of this one snare and then take it out of the whole recording. Because the snare doesn't change. You don't change snare sounds. You may change amplitude. Doesn't change the frequency spectrum or frequency range of that snare. So it's a pretty cool thing you can do with that. You know, it's also part of the method of being able to find the frequency. So when you qualify your sound, which is give it a quality, what is too much about it? Is it too boxy? Is it too hard? Is it too sibilant? Is it too much low? So I use this hunt and kill to reduce the other instruments. Now I can use it to shape the sound of this actual chord here, because I'm bandpassing it. Okay, so this brings me to a next point. When is too many bands in one EQ? And here's my rule, personally. I actually didn't write this down. When the EQ is doing more than one function. So right here, this EQ was strictly to reduce the drums in this sample. So now I will bring in another EQ to sculpt this sound. And that kind of brings me to my next point about how bands affect phasing. Because more bands equals more phasing. And I kind of talk about that right here, right after cutting an EQ hole. Because cutting EQ holes is almost as important as being able to understand what the bands do and how they're attenuated. But the main point is right here. Phase. So minimum phase, natural phase, analog, digital, zero latency. Those are all meaning that. Natural phase and minimum phase are a latent form of zero latency. So zero latency has zero latency, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have any phase discrepancy. So the old-fashioned analog systems, all right, and this is from article as well. So it's kind of interleaved with that, and I linked this article out because this guy's a professional engineer, and none of this information is wrong. So, what happens is that these two things kind of intertwine. Every time you add gain to a band, you add phase artifacts, a phase shift, resulting in artifacts that occur but seek to minimize their effects. So when you're in zero latency mode, it seeks to minimize the problems between left and right channel. So natural phase doesn't really compensate for this as much, but it does have kind of a nice natural coloration and phase shift. So it is saying that this will naturally phase shift. And then linear phase minimizes the amount of phasing altogether, nearly transparent. So we have the hard definitions right here. ProQ matches the magnitude response of analog EQing as close as possible, obviously without introducing latency. So exactly like natural phase, but it's compensating for the latency specifically. So natural phase performs even better. Not only perfectly matches the magnitude response of the analog EQing, but also closely matches the analog phase response. It delivers the most accurate frequency response and best sound quality, even at lowest frequencies and highest Q settings, without introducing noticeable pre-ring or long latency, dude. Oh! They were just so stoked while typing that. So, I mean, that's really cool, though. So that means that it is emulating the way an analog EQ works with its phase response, but it's minimizing the bad phase discrepancy and creating coloration. So when you create phase discrepancies and phase shifts in an analog setting, then it actually creates this balance and kind of like a spectral blurring. That's what they call it, blurring. So if we open up an analog EQ here, I'll go to waves. Let's go to waves. Waves is a good example because, they're just so all over the place, in terms of with what they're emulating and how they're doing it. But the EQs are actually pretty decent. So, again, all these are digital. We're looking for an analog one. So that's all the channel strips, including SSL emulations. So SSL EQ is stereo. So if you're using one of these, go to the analog button, make sure it's off, because that is a looped sample of noise that you don't really need. And then all these should look familiar from the basic band food groups I just gave you, which is low, low mid, highs. So it's like, that's always going to be the case. And they go into certain frequency ranges here. They have a bell curve, which is the typical type of peak filter. But what's the difference? What's the big difference here? When we add gain in an analog setting, not only is it adding phase shifting, but it's adding saturation. So the more gain you add to a band, the more second order harmonics will be generated just from gaining it on this SSL channel strip. Because this is not just a gain knob, this is a tube knob. This is a tube amount. So it's how much processing to create analog gain staging. So it has multiple effects. A larger blurring range, so it's going to phase shift. These frequency ranges are kind of, I guess, they're not perfect. This is an actual crossover, whereas these allow you to shift between 200 hertz up to 2.5, 600 hertz up to 7K. So, and then also 1.5 up to 6K, and this is a shelf filter. Anything that has a bell curve and a Q size. Q size is also called bell curve focus. So when we're working in like natural phase or things like that, it's kind of emulating the spectral blurring without any of the saturation. Hence why it said no ping, no pre-ping and stuff like that. All right, so that's pretty cool about the way these filters kind of like affect things. I'm sure, unless you've already known that, you've known that EQ adds phasing by its function, not by its limitation. The function of the EQ is literally to phase. It's to phase out a band and reduce its power by that phasing. And so that brings me to my next point, and like the types of reduction. We've already talked about this, in depth. High pass, low pass. This is here for your reference from another engineer, and so that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this too, because I really do believe in that Bob Katz book about mastering audio. And if you don't, I highly recommend you just get it and read through it. I've learned almost everything I know about how to master and mix like really precisely from that. But it's not because Bob Katz is the man. It's because Bob Katz, took into account the objectivity of engineering. So it all is opinion based. It is taste based. It changes with each era. So it's important that we as younger producers see where we've been, add to it, and then push it further. Because we're going to push it further regardless of whether or not we're even aware of it. And when things become a trend, the wrong way becomes a trend, then it's the right way. That's just how it works. So using 10 OTTs used to be a thing of lunacy, absolute madness, but now it is par of the course. All right, so it's something to keep in mind when going through this stuff. Where to kind of take this and where to kind of use it efficiently and effectively, and use it as effects too. Okay, okay. Should be good now. All right. Bro, they hacked into my computer and we good. We back. We live. All right. We didn't lose anybody. Hopefully not. All right. So that's what happens. You know, they're working on the fiber in my area, which is like, it's just the most awesome thing in the world. One of the reasons why I'm taking a break next week, because they will be doing that next week and making sure we have 1.5 gigabytes, just like they said, not 250 megabytes like they're giving us. Bastards, dog. All right, so notch filters again, the most phasey one. But what's dope about this is that notch filters are my favorite thing for all types of sine compression, all types of Reese filtering in general. And my philosophy with Reese filtering is the phasier the better. So it's the shit that's broken actually sounds really dope on sound design effects. So never be conservative with that. Always be liberal with how you're using an EQ in a sound design sense. If you think it's going to make you a virgin, like all of those EQ memes going around right now, then I mean, sure, it can reverse your virginity. Like definitely, if you use too many bands, instantly recedes back into you. Like like you just like inhale and a bunch of snot goes right down your throat. That's your virginity. It's like, oh! So, all right, so notch filters are cool, but also another thing to keep in mind is that when you start to subtract, and the hunt and kill method, you will start to create this level of phasing. So the more phasing that you want to introduce will be controlled by the amount of gain you reduce or introduce. So again, you're gonna have a ton of phase if you add or subtract, I would say around plus 6 dB. So it's incremental though. So plus 6 dB is pretty high. I can push like 10 dB on a sound and be like only fine until I hit 10. If you're doing stuff for like taste, you should be doing it based on your ear. It should be your first go-to. Mixing should be a separate process entirely from your sound design stage. Oh yeah, so Josh, to that point, LSV, like it's what I was just saying, and it's like there are good phasing types, including with beating. There are good types of beating. This is probably the only good type of beating in all senses of the word. By just taking like an operator, two sine waves, and then beating them against each other. And that's a really cool effect. I do that a lot with like deep dub and especially drum and bass stuff. Get those like super smooth wobbly basses that go. They do that little effect. Yeah, so I like that sound. Put a little erosion on that and saturate it. It's real nice. All right, so talked all about phasing. Notch filters are the phasiest. You can add a ton of notch filters, and in the notch filters construction, again, a reverse phase bandpass filter. So when you are talking about a legit, real notch filter, it should look like that, like all the way down to infinity. It shouldn't have a stopping point. It should always be an infinity. It should always go down to neg infinity because it's reducing down the actual the original source material and phasing it out completely. Okay, so in terms of mixing with phasing though, that's actually a really good question because it brings us to the next thing literally, which is like mid-side EQ and FFT. Because FFT EQs are vocoders or filter banks. Mid-side EQ is a way to make a mono signal actually stereo by, splitting it into 2 channels, you can do this with stereo too. It's not limited to mono. But this is highly debated. And I know Noisia uses this on some of their masters to make sure that their kicks hit super well in like a club environment that's mixing into mono. But in a general sense of mid-side EQ on a master, it's probably going to be admonished, I guess, to describe it. And I included this little article here. Oh, no, probably shouldn't do that. Not because I don't want you to see my Twitter, but because I don't want Chrome to crash my stream, as it did yesterday. But yeah, there's a little guide here on how to use midside for mastering. And midside can be, again, a way to make a mono signal stereo, or now a stereo signal mono. So it splits a stereo signal into a mid and side channel. Now the mid is all the mono information, and the side is the opposite. So you can do that with left and right speaker. What it means is it's taking the right channel, flipping the phase, and then the side channel has the original phase. And so what happens is right in the middle, where it's the mid, it takes out and phase cancels all the information that should be there in the side channel. And so now, pretty much the mids, the lows, things that you want to go, you can literally high pass them out. But the side channel is a flipped phase, literally phase inducing. So that's why mid-side EQ is highly debated, because it is literally a phase discrepancy introduced into your sound. Okay, so it's pretty cool. We're gonna put that into practice in a second here. But yeah, so understand what all these guys do. Shelves, obviously, pretty straightforward. A shelf filter. The Q will change the steepness and might change a dip and a boost at the point where it changes slope. So what's that look like? Put one of these guys in here, make it a shelf. That's what it should look like. This is a tilt shelf though. So it's literally pushing all the bands down. Should be different types of shelves, like high shelf and low shelf. And they do similar functions. Low shelf should be for the lows. So when we get into analog filters like that, or you just use one, this is the type of filter that should be on this low band, is shelf filters. Because they, really only should be working on a certain set of frequencies. Hence why the tilt shelf is so weird, because this is kind of like a high pass or high shelf, low shelf kind of thing, based on where you put the amplitude of the band. Changes into either or. So it's kind of cool. You could automate that, have it do some effects. If you wanted to. But yeah. So that's how the shelf filter should work. Again, shelving, pushing up a whole band of frequencies, not just, one bell curve worth. Yeah, and then obviously bandpass is a bandpass filter. When you work in Pro Q with the bandpass, it will, as you can see right here, it is conforming to the other bell curves. So that'll be in addition to the bandpass's shape in general. So you can make some really interesting bandpasses like this, because it literally will scale it as well. We'll follow that scale. Do I have an external DSP? No, not at the moment. I was about to get the eGPU, but I'm just waiting on that. I will at some point have an Apollo and stuff like that. I was about to get an Apollo, but then it doesn't allow me to send CV information out and do a bunch of stuff like I can do with the Motu. So pretty much my only requisite for an interface really is like, can it do DSP at some point, and can it go up to 192? So I want an Apollo just because it can go up to 192 plus 32-bit float and 32-bit bit depth, or I guess 64 float, 32-bit depth. So it can record 32-bit audio as well as 192 on an Apollo. So it's pretty deep. But yeah, the UAD plugins are really some of the best analog emulations in the game. And I've talked to the people at SSL literally told me this because I was doing some kind of walkthrough for one of them at the studio I used to work for, and he went on a rant for a couple hours about how nobody buys an SSL console anymore. Waves emulated the 9000, which is very general and was actually one of their worst consoles. So literally every single console the 9000 came out with was different. Because it was handmade, so they just didn't account for how many discrepancies there would be in every single channel strip. So, being they don't know which SSL 9000 they did, so they have no clue which one they actually emulated. UAD actually did like the SSL 4000 or 5000, which is like one of the flagship models. Like if you ever heard of expressions or any of that stuff, they're being used in all those like Jimi Hendrix studios and all that. So those are the classic ones, and that's what UAD is emulating, and those were printed off, so they were very consistent. And UAD is just classically known to be an amazing company when it comes to outboard gear and hardware shit already. So when they came out with the Apollo, the entire industry shifted because the Apollo literally was 10 steps above everything else that was out there. It was offering something like Avid was offering a lot of different companies with like their 003 and all that, which had DSP in it, Millennia Pre's, as well as its own clock source and all that stuff. And so, but the big drawback to that is you can only use an 003 with Pro Tools. So the Apollo was like, well, what if you can just use that with any DAW and also upgrade it to any size? You can put a satellite on there and add more cores anytime you want. Add another Apollo on there, add as many channels as you want, link as many together. So it's huge. What they did was huge for that. So if you're looking for real emulations, that's a place to start. Like I used to use them all the time for my for my job and stuff, but now I just don't really have the need for crazy shit like that because I'm not doing a ton of stuff like that. But they have amazing emulations of saturators, compressors, mastering, bus compressors as well, like the Shadow Hills. That's probably one of my favorite plugins in existence. Shadow Hills mastering compressor is super amazing. Where did I put that thingy? Power plugins. Yeah, so they got a ton of that stuff and all the Neve stuff as well. The SSL dude also told me that Neve is way more used in the electronic community and hip hop community abroad, and that Ice Cube and Lil Wayne and Kanye all rent out Neve consoles for 2-week periods to just run all their electronic tracks like through Ableton, from Ableton through that console back into Ableton, just print it all through that shit real quick. Oh yeah, and Brainworks plugins too. Those stuff's really good. SPL, which is the plugin alliance. I believe I have those around here somewhere. You have the BX stuff right here, and then SPL stuff. So those are all really, really good things. A good place to start with all of it is Ozone, Isotope, and FabFilter. But you definitely don't want to stop there. You want to keep growing. Waves is definitely beneficial to have, as well as Brainworks and plugin alliance. Yeah. So if anybody has like a list they want to just drop into the Discord, definitely feel free. Okay, so now into just kind of like exploring ProQ, because we talked about all this stuff, and this is something we just talked about. So I want to talk about minimum phase and natural phase a little bit more, but now we're going to start going into some of the other functions inside of ProQ. So ProQ is really sick. Again, this is a outline I made of the manual. So a lot of language from the manual put into here, so it's accessible. You don't have to dig into it, but you can have it open if you want. A lot of the things are really just about just ease of use with ProQ. So what's dope with ProQ? What can you do? So you can do dynamic EQ for 24 bands. So that means each one of these EQ bands can act like a compressor. Yep, that's crazy. Do I prefer visual EQs? Yes, I do. I like to have a spectrum along with the EQ. And you can see from this little picture here that you can see the original curve or spectrum along with the reduction. So that's really sick because now you can tell this was the original low end, this is what I shaved off. So it's really accurate, allows you to be quick. You know, I don't use analog EQs unless I'm trying to do some type of coloration thing. It's like, oh, I want the highs to be brighter, but I also want them to kind of blend. So an analog EQ is for blending purposes, in my opinion. When you're trying to do transparent type of reduction based decisions, go to a digital EQ. So you can see the actual spectrum and you have a lot of control over it. ProQ is the best one, in my opinion. It's better than all the other ones, mainly because it's, mastering level, as well as just having every function that most EQs have. All this stuff is what Ozone 8 and Ozone 7 and Ozone 9 and Neutron all kind of specialize with a bunch of different modules. But this does it all in one, so that's really cool. All right, so not only can you do dynamic EQ, you can do 7.1 EQ. That means 8 channels you can send out of one EQ. 7.1 mastering. That's crazy. This is also new, the brick wall. Not exactly really good, but I like to have a more gentle slope. Again, the more reduction you do, the more phase you'll introduce. So a brick wall filter will sound like literal, sample rate reduction because it's just so hard. It's so flat. It kind of looks like a MP3 as well. But cool for an effect. We just looked at those tilt filters. I was saying they can become both a low shelf or a high shelf. Spectrum analyzer, this thing is amazing now. What's really crazy on ProQ3 is that you can go and take multiple instances of ProQ3 and they all register together. So if I'm doing that, we're just going to go and put that into practice here, and I'll just drop ProQs on 3 of these tracks. Now I can go into this analyzer section and select from any of my other ProQs and see their frequency range. So I got this word EQ on all 3 of these guys, and that's a MIDI track, but let's do that again here. So I can change the audio of this a little bit around and pitch it up, pitch this down. It sounds super evil. Alright, so I'm going to turn this guy off. Do that by hitting the X button here. Alright, so this is sick. I don't think you understand how sick that is. Alright. So, what's really cool about this is that it's showing me a couple of things. It's showing me the frequency range, and then the red lines are where there are clashing frequencies. So clashing frequencies are the ones that you want to go and notch out. So if this is the same exact source audio material, then it's going to clash at the loudest points. That's about here. So what's cool is I can go and like select this, and then I can have it, you know, from that list you see right there. It allows me to go and display that EQ and the spectrum of that inside of my ProQ now. I can also use it to go and take a snapshot, EQ match. So it's now popping up that other spectrum. So now I can go and take the EQ curve from that and drop it onto this by just hitting the EQ match button. Okay, so ProQ3 like just exponentially steps up the game of ProQ2. And it really just fills in the gap of like everything new that came out with like ozone stuff and a few other like surfer EQ and a few other EQs like that. Surfer EQ is really unique though to itself. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point, but just to kind of like brush in what surfer EQ does is it holds a curve like this. So say if this was the curve that I drew in, but then all of the curve's frequencies are now hooked up to MIDI and they change based off of key tracking. Yeah, exactly that. For masking, like EQ masking, that's 100% like how to find clashing frequencies. That's why I like to work with spectrums and spectrum analyzers when I'm like doing that kind of stuff, just so I know where I'm actually clashing. And so again, you know, if this is on multiple tracks, all you have to do is hit this analyzer button and it pops them all up here. And I'll just like duplicate it a bunch of times. See how many times it will actually give me that instance. As many times as I want. So that's insane, dude. That's literally insane. And then there's a bunch of other functions here. So spectrum grab, if you leave this mouse, if you leave the mouse above the spectrum for a few seconds, ProQ will automatically enter spectrum grab mode. So that's what you do want this on. So what's cool about this? Oh, see now I'm hitting a processing limit though. Just with my stream. Let me delete these. All right, yeah. So it is insane. Come on. Need you to delete today. Thank you. All right. So spectrum grab. It should be on by default. Ah, there it goes. All right, so you just highlight down here. So now I'm in spectrum grab mode. So it updates this spectrum every time it like kind of creates a new peak. So now when I have these points, I can just reduce that piece of the spectrum. So remember, highlight on the bottom part. Be like, oh, this part. Nope, that one. Oh, missed it. There it is again. Reduce. And so you're literally making choices now by just literally having ProQ take that snapshot for you. And you see the actual update in real time, so you can make really, really specific choices. Yeah, so ProQ has this too, but now we have EQ matching and all this other stuff along with it. So I can just literally monitor between my tracks just in one like ProQ instance. Like if I'm trying to mix my bass with my sub and I have a ProQ on both, I can literally see those EQ curves now match up. So this is something that Isotope Insight can do if you have the new version, where you can kind of like parse it out into a bunch of different tracks and monitor each of them. So that's cool. But this is ProQ and this EQ is for you. So this is what you want to really kind of like get under control if you're gonna like really kind of understand the modern art of mixing, because modern mixing is like just amplified tenfold by this tool pretty much. So again, that's EQ match it takes the snapshot of another EQ and puts it together. And this is not talking about the EQ itself. So this is like I can EQ match the kind of like noise profile of like another track. Say I really like the way, and this is something I actually did to learn about, well, just about dynamic range and summing in general, just because, you know, to my point about, you know, your main, I guess, cup size. So it's like you're gonna have one finite cup. You have finite amount of frequencies in that cup. So when I heard a Swiss Beats track at one point, because I was like, oh, like someone wants, like I was literally producing a track for somebody who wanted to sound like Alicia Keys, and I wanted to kind of give the beat that vibe in the end as well. So I took an EQ match of it, and I realized that there wasn't anything above 11 to 12K in the entire track, and I listened to a bunch of other of his other tracks, and there was zero. I was like, well, why Swiss Beats? Why you do this? And then I was like, oh, because he's printing only to tape. That is why, because tape can't produce over 12K. And that is why tape sounds warm. It's because it adds saturation, harmonics that weren't already there, and it limits the frequency range of the audio. So it can't produce over 12K. So literally it's the limitation of his medium. But when I was comparing it to like a Jay-Z track or like a couple other tracks that I was doing, it was louder than those. I was like, why is his shit way louder? Why is it louder than Jay-Z's shit? And I was just like racking my brain around it. And I was like, it has to be that. It has to be that the summing is more dialed around like 40 hertz up to 12K. And that it has more dynamic range now for that range, because it's not having to give that dynamic range to 12K and above, which 12K and above is 10,000 frequency, 10,000 hertz. That's a lot. That's like almost the same amount as below. And so you're giving all that energy to something that isn't really even being used musically. It's all air. So what a lot of people end up doing is they reduce the quality of their beat like that, and so they'll make it a little bit more lo-fi, kind of print it to tape as well. Again, hence why the beat producers would do that. And then they print their vocal as such a high quality that it just sits above the entire mix, and then the beat just kind of bangs on the bottom. So it's like the beat doesn't exist over 12, but like say like Alicia Keys' voice does. And back to the qualities of, you know, like how to quantify like what is going on in your frequencies here. Everything above 12K is called air. Sibilance, air, brightness. So in order to get a lot of air out of vocals, you have to make sure that the vocal is existing pretty much only above 12K. The only thing that is existing is those syllables from the vocalist. So if you're trying to produce like some top 40 hip hop, that's 1000% how to do it. I just gave you literally the secret formula of how to get your shit loud. It's really up to you to use it now, all 17 of you. Literally everybody else who's not listening to this is literally missing out. And that's not an egotistical thing to say. This is literally shit I've learned from like professionals. And like working at fantasy studios and stuff in like the Bay really opened my eyes to a lot of this stuff, because I went and, you know, used these methods with them, and they ended up, you know, asking me how to do hyper compression at some point, because they needed to do this stuff now. They can't just, because fantasy studios did like Miles Davis, Coltrane, every single like jazz artist from that era, like cool jazz as a whole. And like now that there is you know, a new era of mixing, they have to go and you know, kind of pivot to that. What book is this? This is the PDF that I wrote for this class. So that should be in the Discord. So definitely, definitely go cop that because I have all the stuff in there. So again, you got to be able to, channel what people are already doing at the top level. It's not about, just fucking being on your own fucking sweat, dude. Like we get it. It is your sweat, but it's also your sweat to learn and be humble about that learning. It's like you're never too good to learn. Bottom line. All right, so now to the final point, and probably the most advanced thing, I guess, if I want to say that this EQ matching is not advanced. It shouldn't be, though. Really it shouldn't be. You just click this. You look at it, man. You hit the EQ match. It works. And you can patch it in from whatever track you want. Pretty simple. We're going to get back into this when we talk about mastering and like doing some more actual mixing shit with this. Every time I've learned this in every school I've like been to or whatever, which is like college and vocational school, is lump mixing with all of this shit. So you're just like, now bring out a track and EQ everything. It's like, no, don't do that, because we really just need to get a handle on how everything works in here first. Because I can't, I'm not going to be able to like tell you how all this shit works if I don't really have a moment to just scale with it and work with it and mess with it around with you. So there's a ton of shit you can do with this. Like right now, I'm just scaling all these with command and shift. Shift is fine amounts. Command does Q. Shift command does a fine amount of Q. If I command or option shift click, it changes the size of each slope. So I can change that all the way up to a brick wall. If I do command shift click, option command click. Option command click changes the type of filter. That's cool. I like it. Yeah, for real, dog. Yeah, we should definitely make a book. And like, I've actually compiled a lot of the original PDFs too, and those are collectively, once this whole class is done, this will probably be like a 300-page book or something like that. So it's definitely something good. So again, highlight, click and drag. Switch the band type, option, command click, alt, command click. Option shift click changes the slope, or should in theory. So, ton of stuff, so I don't have to actually, go into this little counter here. You can also right click and do the same things. Change the shape, the slope, but also change the stereo placement. So I can place this on the left, right, stereo, mid, or side. So now I have all those choices to turn this regular EQ into a mid-side EQ. Oops, I almost saved that as a default. That's my default, dude. It's because I'm a virgin. And to be honest, dog, with Rackmuff, what you're saying, it is going to be kind of like that, because they are trying to teach you this certified curriculum. This is not a certified curriculum. This is the curriculum I've created from my experience. And like, I used to teach a certified curriculum, so I know exactly what's in that, and I know how limited it is, and I also know how they kind of brainwash people into like working a certain way, and also putting their art out in the world a certain way. So it's just, that's like the tenfold reason why I do this and am doing it. But yeah, so last point here about EQs. Whoa, 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 dog. What y'all doing? Let's just delete all of these. Okay, so I was talking about dynamic EQ. All right, so what's dynamic EQ? Can anybody in the chat tell me what a dynamic EQ might do? I'll give you 4 minutes. Just kidding. 1 minute. While I stretch. Take a sip of coffee. What does the dynamic EQ do? All right, so Ori, they care about transients for some reason. Where are you coming from with that, dude? Yes, yes. So, LSV, almost right. Yes, yes. Okay, so Po Boy, Stosu, Aperture, and Lazy Boy. Gulp is an acceptable answer. So only Ori's answer was not acceptable. All right, so what it is it changes the cutter boost based off of the threshold or the incoming gain. So I have a gain knob here, but I also have this little dynamic range knob. So when I click and drag up or down, it's telling my band now, based on this threshold, to turn up from here, from this point, from where the EQ is resting. So I can cut like this and have the transient go back to flat. But when it's not being affected, it's reducing. So say if like you have this latent frequency at 3.2 because a baby's crying in your snare recording, but you still want your snare transient. So you reduce the baby, and when the snare comes through, you put it back up. So reduce the baby, boost the transient. Reduce that baby, shut that baby up with compression. But EQ. So it's like noise reduction, that's constant power, negative power, downwards. And then it pushes it up when the threshold gets crossed. So when the threshold gets crossed, it raises from this point, which is being reduced, to this point. All right, so I said that like 3 times, so you should understand it by now. So again, when it crosses the threshold, it raises from this point to this point, from 0 to 100. So it's similar to expansion. It's like compression, but it's more like an expander, because expanders and compressors have 2 different characteristics. Upwards compression, downwards compression, upwards expansion, downwards expansion. They're all different. And we're going to go through that in the next class, because that is compression. Stosu, would dynamic EQ be cleaner than multiband comp? I've been seeing less people talking about multiband compression outside of OTT. Mainly because people don't understand multiband compression or compression at its fundamental level. But to your point though, it really depends, because this is constant power, whereas a compressor would be more like this, where it's keeping it down, and anytime the threshold is crossed, it keeps it down again. So it doesn't, like with an expander, it could keep it down and then push it up and then multiply that transient. This is literally just bringing it back up to this set point. So it's kind of like it's like a multi-band compressor, but with no crossover. no messy crossover to worry about phase with. None of that shit. So like if we load up the Pro MB, Pro MB is the fab filter version of multi-band compression. Probably one of my favorite ones, besides the Isotope. Isotope is my favorite multi-band compressor, besides the Ableton one. OTT is a preset. Whenever I hear people say, I use OTT, I'm like, the plugin? Oh, you mean the preset. Alright, so this is a multi-band compressor. So again, no messy crossovers to worry about. So that's pretty much the biggest thing, is there's no linear phase crossover. So it's not really good for mastering. I wouldn't use it for a master personally, unless something was like, you know, literally needed to be pushed out or something like that. But when I need something pushed out with mastering, I use dynamics. So being able to control the sustain and transient design by hand is very crucial. And that's the whole point of being able to know how a compressor works. So, you know, grandma analogy, how fast does grandma turn down that band when that threshold is crossed? So in this case, grandma's, you know, already turned it down, but her hand's not on it, you know. But the minute it does get crossed, her hand will go back and turn it up or turn it down. So it's not, but her hand's not on it. She's not holding it there. She's not doing anything to like keep it there. And there's no attack release, you know, really that's going to affect a ratio. This is the ratio. The ratio is, push it to this point. The ratio is very specific, you know, plus this amount of dB. When you're in a compressor, that's probably the most confusing thing in general. People understand what milliseconds are, but they see a ratio and they think, math. So this is, you know, really specific, and says add 18 dB specifically, because 18 dB is how much I'm reducing. Push it all the way back up to 0. So it's, if I want to give you the hard definition, is makeup gain mixed with a audio leveler. That's the hard definition. Makeup gain mixed with an audio leveler. Audio followers and levelers. They just literally turn up and down knobs. Compression uses algorithms to hold dynamic range or sculpt dynamic range. This will not give you a more defined transient at, you know, whatever this frequency is. It'll turn it up, but it's not going to go and take that envelope and shape it, you know? So that's a big difference. If you don't understand what a dynamic EQ does, that's literally the hard definition and the hard use for it. Like if you want the transient to be louder, you know, but it's already pre-sculpted. So this is something you do post a transient designer. You do not do it in place of a transient designer, if that makes probably the easiest sense for all of you. So threshold again is where it will turn it up. Dynamic range is where it's going to turn it up to. And that's the simplest way to understand it. Dopest thing about this though is it's right here. It's literally off by default. You just got to turn it on and then the bands are always working. It always does this. So it's just, this is just a massive EQ. Absolutely insanely massive. And then it has the piano roll at the bottom here, which is probably like the last thing to talk about here. Just before I talk a little bit more about linear phase and volcano. So mixing in key. This is now back to the harmonic series. So I did kind of mention some of this last week about this, where it's like, if you're mixing in key, you want to go and push the fundamental frequency, say at a snare, if you're doing a snare. Then you want to go and push the fundamental frequency at a right pitch. Not just going to push it. Like say if my low end is around 200 hertz. That's like kind of a G. But the pitch of my track is at F3 exactly. You know, so I would go and pitch it down to this point. And what's cool about self-resonating bands, the very much way more louder algorithm, is that they will add that sine wave that pings into the signal. It will tune your sound because it will create kind of like a new envelope inside of your sound that can be shaped again. So I would put another compressor or transient designer post this EQ so I can shape this pinged out low pitch that's now perfectly in tune with F3. So I was about to include a pitch to frequency chart, but I literally haven't used a pitch to frequency chart since I've been using this. So that's sick. It's like literally cannot beat this. This is power level well over 1 million right here. You know, being able to have a sunk version too, where it's locked. So C#5 is exactly 54.37 hertz on this scale. So this is something really to keep in mind when you're going to mixing in key, because mixing in key is huge. And it's not mixing in key like a DJ. We're not mixing in a track to another track. It's not that mixing in key. This is mixing your track in key, and now mixing your kick drum and your snare drum in key. And that has a huge effect on the sound. Huge. You wouldn't even like be able to, you would have to have a complete track that's mixed out of key intentionally and then go mix it in key to really hear it. A lot of people do it by default with just their ears. Yeah, so yeah, Galva, I used to have one like on my desktop, a pitch to frequency chart, and I just don't anymore because I use this and I don't need it. And if I need to go and find it, I will open up a spectrum and I'll just go and look in that, because the spectrum really is a godsend for that, just because you can go and just highlight anywhere and it will tell you. So, I mean, it's not going to give me my exact pitch, but I can be like, oh, it's around 200 hertz. I can go right in here, tune it to the note. So it's literally, you know, really intentional. I don't know if you talked about this, but if you turn down a specific harmonic, it can increase the overall loudness. Yes, I did talk about that. So that was the whole point of the cup size, of like turning down things at the bottom and top. So again, just to reiterate it, because it seemed like you kind of like misconstrued the meaning a little bit. And that's fine. Yeah, it's really confusing. So again, if you were just to reduce a specific harmonic, like Ori's saying, it's like if this was over resonated and, you know, was clipping your output, you can get a more balanced response and a flatter response, which again, flatness equals loudness, because everything is pumping from your speaker in one direction at the same time. So it's like a chorus and a summing engine. So when a chorus or like a choir or a symphony, they all sing at the same time, they become louder, you know, because it's summing. Anytime more than one thing happens at the same time, it sums. But if their frequencies are slightly different, you know, from the original source audio, say if it was like the original sample or whatever, and they're exactly the same, you will phase cancel. But if it's two different performances, you will sum. So if there's any movement beating between those two frequencies, say your kick frequency is out of tune with your sub frequency, which is a huge thing. That's why I'm saying it's so slow. Your kick is out of tune with your sub, and so that's why your low end sucks ass. You can't get representation in the sub of your hip hop tracks. It's because your kick is out of tune with your sub. And so what should happen when your kick happens and it's in tune, in phase with your sub, is it should sum. When things sum, they get louder. So when your kick hits, your low end gets too loud. You shouldn't have a problem with loudness if things are in phase. So if things are out of phase, then you lose the low end. You're like, I can't hear the kick low end over my sub low end. And the problem there is that there's too much low end in your kick. If you take the low end out of your kick, then you will hear the kick now. Because the sub is literally phasing the kick out of existence because they're out of tune with each other. So if you change the pitch of the kick to be in the same bass pitch, so that means they're both at, D1. So the sub is at a perfect D1 because it's generated, and then you want to resonate or retune your kick to be in D1 at the perfect pitch as well. If you sidechain, you do not have that problem because you don't have the actual what the fuck is that? Gold Dragon? Why don't you get out of my chat and suck my balls? Thank you. All right, so so you won't have that problem if you sidechain because it's not going to be there. Exactly to my point. They're existing at the same time. They're not in the same time if one is being ducked. So same amplitude, different frequency, beat, and then they phase out of existence and you lose clarity. So you want to make sure you have holes cut around that. And that's pretty much the whole point, is that you're cutting around the meat, pretty much the good stuff, where you're making sure that you can see between your other tracks, like, the sub is phrasing out with my kick. I have a sub EQ, I have a kick EQ. I can go and look at these two EQs now in my Pro Q. So you shouldn't have that problem in terms of finding that frequency now. It should be pretty easy. So that's just kind of like a big thing. Overshoots in what sense? You're gonna have to be a little bit more specific on that. Right, so if you high pass a kick, again, you do have to have it in key. Like if there's a tone, but that tone is at 150 hertz, and you have a sub frequency that has your sub and some overtones, you still will have phasing, because exactly my point again, they exist at the same frequency. So bottom line, you need to have side chaining between your kick and your sub. If you don't have that and it's not cutting out entirely, then they need to be in tune with each other to some. So like with a trap track, it's nearly impossible to hear your kick and your sub if you don't do this. And this is something like I big time respect about trap producers that produced in Reason. Dude, because like Reason was one of the hardest things to use, but it was a necessity for hip hop producers back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, because they would literally trigger all of their sub kicks and all that stuff from like redrum and all that stuff. Yeah, Jestik, he's a huge one, as well as Space Gang, Durg, Noah used to use it. Yeah, just a ton of people. All right, so the big thing to keep in mind is how to EQ, how to qualify what's wrong. If you don't know how to say, this is what's wrong with my mix, then you're just going to be able to qualify the basic things anybody can qualify about a song. The sub is too loud. The sub. It's just all too loud. All of the sub. And it's just such a broad terminology that you can't even, when you just say the sub is too loud, it's like, if I'm the engineer in that situation, I'm just like, all right, well, let me list out all 10 things that have sub and we'll go from there, dude. Because yeah, it's just, you're not giving me specific shit. Like if Carnage was in the studio with me and she's just like, yo man, that shit sounds dope, but can you make that sub like very much way more louder? And I would just be like, oh shit, dude, you're right. Security, get this guy out of here. What did he say? All I heard was, hey dude, can you kick my ass out of here because I'm an idiot? Sorry. So you got to be able to say like, what's wrong with the sound, also what you need from the sound. If you can't do those two things, literally those two things, then you will be lost and you won't know how to EQ your shit. Hence why you need a chart, just to know, here's where vocals are, here's where wind instruments or odd and even harmonic things are. So this would be odd and even like a sawtooth, and this would be more like a square wave. And then drums are drums. Drums don't change. All right, so yeah, so that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to get through today. Again, go through ProQ, and if you find yourself running into trouble with all this stuff, I listed out all the main things that should be your go-tos for this, just for using the manual specifically, because that is my big point. And I was going to have you guys outline, but then I realized that's asking a lot. It's asking a lot from people that didn't pay for this. So I'm just going to go lay it out for you. What's great about me doing this for everybody is that I do it for myself too. I'm getting better every time I write a curriculum. So that's what I know about myself and about teaching, and why I love teaching so much. It's because I get that out of it. That's what I get, is I become better and I understand it more. All right, so last thing about linear phase. So we talked about linear phase last week. What's the benefit from it? What's the drawback? Benefit is it's super accurate. So we're talking about those phase discrepancies. So when you're using a linear phase EQ, again, you have 1,000+ samples of latency. So 5,000 right now at medium mode, with 116 milliseconds of latency. You can see that on the bottom left corner. I'm not just a sample math genius. I can calculate samples into milliseconds within half a second, dude. I learned that all at Sylvan Learning Center and Kumon. All right, so what's cool about this? Why would you use this outside of a mastering setting? Because it is sold as a mastering thing, but that is literally semantics. It's not important. It's saying, that certain things can only be used for certain things. Like OTT should only be used for compressing OTT things, not every single track in your session, 5 times per track. So obviously you're not gonna listen to that. So what would linear phase EQ be good for you for? For any type of parallel compression and parallel EQ. That is the point. And I just summed that up for you. If you've ever had parallel compression or parallel processing phase problems, using a linear phase EQ to sculpt the parallel process signal will literally minimize the phase by 1 to 2 times that. I can't give you a hard amount because it is, again, subjective, so it is based off of whatever you're working on at the time. But if you're doing a whole drum track and you're trying to EQ that along with compress it on a parallel track, parallel processing, you're going to want to use the linear phase EQ, because in your options, you have delay comp. Delay comp is on by default. When you're tracking, you should turn this guy off, and this is where it lives. But when you're working in tracks like this, so say if you were working with your drums or whatever, you're like, oh yeah, sick, glue compressor, sick, dude, dope. And then you're like, oh, I'm gonna parallel in here. It's like, oh, glue compressor is cool, but I'm gonna use isotope or linear phase EQ inside of this audio effects rack. Wrong, don't do that. So if you start doing this, don't do that. Glue compressor is fine because glue compressor is 0 latency. So any type of 0 latency processing you could put in parallel chains in an audio effects rack. Why? Because of this again. Delay comp. Delay comp does not work for individual chains in an audio effects rack. If it was to work, honestly, I would be confused how they did it. How you move in 2 things in different times in one chain, that would be insane. It does make sense on how it worked, but it just doesn't work like that in Ableton specifically. It does not compensate. So that means run it to another track and parallel compress that way, because tracks are delay compensated. So you want to do parallel compression and parallel processing on separate tracks. If you're doing parallel processing like this, it better be with zero latency or some type of effect. If you're trying to do some type of mastering or mixing thing with those effects, you are not doing yourself a favor. And I've seen people do that. I've had Ableton teachers give out Ableton audio effects racks that have a ton of parallels on a master. I'm just like, oh, what are you doing? And then I've listened to like people's masters that come to me and be like, yo, dude, this sounds like shit. Why? And I'm like, let me see your chain. I'm like, where'd you get this chain? And then they told me, and I was like, I need to speak to that teacher. Yeah, so I mean, you can't physically compensate it for it, like what Baron's saying. But yeah, it's just really not. It's really not the move. It's really not what you want to do. And Ableton stock plugins are great. What's great about them is they have soft clip. Soft clip is literally kind of like an analog saturator. And so that just allows you to run into that wall with a glue compressor and get that shit loud. But it also is not, it's not really a mastering chain, unfortunately, to be very specific. Yeah, so what you would have to do, so if you were, to Baron's point, so say if you had a ton of latency between two things in an audio effects rack, kind of like this, is say if this guy was linear phase, or whatever, and I can go and see that, 116.1, yo, bring up a delay, and that's on the new chain, not on this chain. This is one of the reasons why I do not like that they took out the simple delay. So I can type that in, 116, actually I don't know if I can be specific, 116.2. All right, so about 116 milliseconds, 100% wet, zero feedback, and you're good to go. So that would be a manual track delay in order to delay compensate within a chain. So you don't want to have to do that. It's annoying, but that's how to do it if you want to. You just need a finer 100 plus millisecond amount. You need into the hundreds plates at plus 1 second value, possibly. In Pro Tools, they had a sample delay, so you can delay by samples. That's cool. All right, so that's a ton of stuff about EQs. If you're still confused on how to EQ, why to EQ, when to EQ, where to EQ, what to EQ, so many different qualities, then, you know, please ask the questions. Actually didn't cover the solo mode, but solo mode is pretty simple. So it should be a simple key command here for it, I believe. Right. So you can just pretty much solo on the band and then just kind of use it to scroll. So just push a little button like this, which is the headphone button. You should be able to open up the curve by holding down Command up and down. That was Command up and down. When I move up and down without Command, it doesn't do that. This allows me to audition and hear the frequencies. Again, kind of like the hunt and kill method, without having to hunt or sweep. So sweep is the notch, hunt is the peak. All right. So that's a lot of stuff, and that's about 2 hours here. So I put into this outline here that I didn't want to go too deep into Volcano. And EQ matching is advanced, so we're not going to get too deep into that right now. But, you know, and this is what it could be. Like literally at this resolution of gain changes. It's a gain changer and a game changer. Aha. So that's really cool. Again, mastering mixing things, so not exactly going to just get you into EQing something very specifically. Do not want to convolute your thinking right now with, hey, go and EQ match to this Alicia Keys track and figure out why it's dope. It's like not going to make you do that. But I will open up Volcano right now. So Volcano, I use this a lot during my, like, I guess Reese Wednesday things, just because I really like Volcano. Vocablo. Alright, so Volcano is a filter. It is a 4-band filter. Allows me to have 4 different sets of routings. So I can turn on my filters like this, choose my algorithm like that. So what does this mean? We've already talked about signal flow. So this is series. 1 goes into 2, goes into 3, goes into 4. Additive, they all run parallel to the output. These are series again. 1 goes into 2, 3 goes into 4. Now this is additive and summing. So it adds 1 and 2 together, 2, 3, and 4 individually, and then it adds 3 and 4 together to the output. That's cool. That's dope. So now this one is 3 in line. 1 goes into 2 and 3, and then 4 is alongside that. 3 parallel. 1, 2, and 3 go into 4, or 2 parallel, and then 2 in series. 2 parallel, then 2 in series. So there's a ton of stuff you can do. A ton of different combinations. You have to go and like really use your brain and just be like, what kind of things would this be good for, dude? Like, oh, dude, like what? No, dude. All right, so I usually use this one mainly just for like basses and stuff because it's super good with really giving you control over a lot of things. God, I'm really just disappointed with Ableton right now and it's like keyboard focus. Anytime I have a plugin open and I try to hit delete, it doesn't let me delete until I go and select in there. And it's just, Ableton, if you can fix that ASAP, that'd be nice. It used to not do that. Alright, so I'm just gonna get operator here. That's fine. I'll make a little Reese. Didn't think we were gonna do sound design in processing class. Alright, so I'm gonna make a dual filter or dual oscillator Reese. We only have one filter. But actually a quad filter Reese now. Because there's 4 filters. They each have their own type. So I'm just gonna make the Reese really quick. So 2 saws. Alright, sounds cool. Maybe I want to get a little sub in there. This is just for me now. Now I'm just doing me now. Alright, I just want to get a sub in there. That's for me. Alright, so and now I'm going to go and filter in here because now I'm thinking about, I put sub in this. I have low end coming from this main operator. I'm just going to use this high pass filter with no envelope just to shave off the lows. So now I'm using this high pass filter like an EQ. Alright, make sure these both are in mono too. Again, just for me, because I want it. Alright, so now I'm going to go and start filtering this. So I have 4 filters again, each of them set to low pass right now. And we have the 3 basic types for each filter: high pass, low pass, and band pass. So that means we can make a notch if we go and combine high pass and low pass. Now 1 and 2 create a notch, because again these are parallel. So any shape I go and put into this is going to be summed. Alright, and this is just a processing thing. NARS attacks. It's not what I wanted to type. Sat. Okay, I'm just going to add this right at the end just so I have a little bit more amplitude. Let's actually get 1, 2 levels of saturation here. Since I now have a lot of movement in my mid-range and scooped it out, meaning subtracted the mids, notched them out, scooped them. So a lot of like EQ terms I just said there again. You're going to see that in everything that talks about it. So now that I've scooped them and pooped them, so poop meaning boosted that Q, I'm going to give it a shape too. I'm going to actually sine compress this a little. Alright, so now back to what I was talking about, self-resonating filters just earlier about EQs and how those self-resonate naturally. This also self-oscillates, and it has a little button down here just to turn that off, and you want to keep that on. You do not want that to just be running. This shit gets annoying. So now you have all these filter shapes. So hard, hollow, extreme, tube, metal, easygoing, clean. Gentle and clean should be like the original versions. And again, we're going to go back into this as well. I just want to kind of give you the lowdown here. These are all kind of like convolutions and cutoff shapes. So when you go and over-resonate them, meaning self-oscillate, it will give you a quality, and this will sound hollow, hard, extreme. So now I'm resonating 2 sine waves in there, and those are going to be... Alright, so now I can turn these 2 into like band passes or something like that, and maybe have them beat each other in the middle. Fight to the death, if you will. For the entertainment of my high and low pass filter. They're both watching them just beat each other to death. Like a couple warlords in this notch filters, the Coliseum. You know, that's the kind of shit that just runs through my mind. You don't really want to know what else is. Alright, so again, I'm going to resonate these. I'm going to make them both metal now. Because fighting to the death is super... And why am I using sine compression when I'm over-resonating all of these guys? Because remember, sinusoid oscillators, or these filter frequencies here, are going to resonate sine waves into the sound. And so that'll create a lot of interesting movement with the sound. So what I want you to try, and I didn't assign any homework for this class, but it's to start to implement EQs into your music, into your mixes, but then also try to be experimental with them. Because this is Volcano, but I can do this with any filter essentially and control them like that. So, and just to introduce MIDI sidechaining, and the final piece, which is FFT vocoders and stuff, because that's probably the most easy thing of all of this, ironically. So if I'm running an instrument like that and I want MIDI to trigger on this because I have all these modulators. So I have an envelope generator. I have input envelope triggering, sidechain envelope triggering, a threshold for either of those, and MIDI input, which takes away my threshold. So I go on to my MIDI track. I turn it on input monitoring because that runs any signal through the input to the output without having it record enabled. So I patch it from my instrument, which takes the MIDI from this track, and then I send it back into that track, and that gives me all the MIDI inputs, and I have Volcano right here, plug into one, good to go. So now Volcano on my track, and MIDI learn right here allows me to go and assign MIDI parameters and pots and stuff and move them around like that. But when it's triggering MIDI, the light will light up. So now the light is lighting up. So now I can go and take this crosshair and drop it to one of the cutoffs. If I want to go to a different band, I highlight that band. Now it's on that cutoff. So I can do this to each of them. Drop it to that cutoff. I'm going to go to 4-2. So those are a high and low pass filter. So I'm going to invert that modulation range. So 1 is going to be going up while 2 should be going down. So invert right here for 2, and then positive phase for 1. And then maybe flip the phase for 3